Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to have this incredible musician, professor, educator, and now author. I don't know if this is his first book, but I believe, even if it's not his first, this is the most important thing that you can know about him, that he is all over the place when it comes to jazz. He's inspirational, and I've been following him. I'm a fanboy. I went fanboy a little bit, just so
Oh
you know.
man.
We played some of his tracks, even in some of my shows. So I'm going to get it straight from the horse's mouth on how this music is supposed to sound. Ulysses Owens Jr., welcome to the Guiding Gigs program. How are you, sir?
Man, I'm great, brother. I'm so glad to be here and glad to be talking to you and being a part of what you have going on. I remember when you shot me a message on Instagram, I was incredibly excited because one, I always love getting the word out, but particularly getting the word out through people like you that are truly into the music, into the artist. So I'm honored. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, thank you. The pleasure's all mine. As I just mentioned, I first came in contact with your music strictly that way through, we just mentioned one of your collaborators, Alicia Olatuja, and then your own album, Songs of Freedom. We stole as many cuts off of that as we could and covered them all. I hope you got the royalty check from that.
It's on the
Um,
way.
because again, like your aspect in terms of your music already echoes what I believe in. I'm talking as a musician first. I really should be going to guiding gigs, but now I'm doing the musician side first,
It's
right?
cool.
It's so important to me to connect with musicians who really understand the fullness of what's available to us as genre-less, I could say. So when I saw what you did with that, with pulling from spirituals, pulling from the Nina Simone's, and then from some pop stuff, and everything kind of like went into the back. So I guess I have to start with this question, which is always kind of like, the what do you do, which everyone knows. You can look up Wikipedia to see what you do. But what was your first, things that start to feed your mentality in terms of music? Was it what you heard as a child? Was it a musical family? Like, what started to feed your musical mind at the beginning that, started to evolve over time?
Sure, man. So my beginnings are very much in the Pentecostal church. And I'm sure just like many, you live in Miami, the Pentecostal church, particularly in the South, is huge, and especially back then in the 80s, when I grew up in the 90s. I mean, church for the Black Southern person, unless, you were non-religious, which wasn't that many in the South, but most of your entertainment and exposure to the arts came through the church. So
Right.
yeah, for me, listening to the choir, listening to John P. Key, James Cleveland, Commission, what have you, those were all huge influences for me. And I always say to people, I think that's why the sound of a big band was very easy for me, because
Mm,
I was able to kind of go from hearing like this choir to like a big band,
yeah.
So that was a very easy transition for me to think about and to make. So yeah, so that was my exposure. And then my dad, which is why, which we'll talk about later, the jazz festival is really important to me, because my dad started taking me to the Jacksonville Jazz Festival when I was really young. And he would take me there, and I got to see the Yellow Jackets. I got to see, Count Basie Band. I got to see a lot of really great artists. And that really kind of blew my mind in terms of like, wow, there's another type of music out there. I also had or have a cousin, his name is Kevin Sibley. He's 10 years older than me. So he was at University of Florida, and he was involved in the gospel choir, the jazz band. So every weekend he would come home and he'd start giving me jazz records. So I think
Wow.
from the time I was, a kid, like, 2 years old, I started playing the drums. By the time I was 8 or 9, I became the drummer for my church. I was playing for, two choirs plus the youth choir. Then I was doing, 3, 4 services a week. Then my dad takes me to the jazz festival. Kevin gives me an Oscar Peterson record with him playing Honeysuckle Rose. My parents then bought a videotape for me, DCI videos of Buddy Rich. And then I got hooked on a group called the Yellow Jackets. So I think all of these lanes were converging at one, which were really just letting me know that there's another world out there of music outside of the church. But it was a great, like I always say that the church, I actually want to write, a book about this one day. There's actually a great documentary about the Black church. And one of my friends who was interviewed in the series, her name is Dr. Fedara Hadley. And she's actually the professor of ethnomusicology at Juilliard. And she talks about how the Black church for Black folks was really the first conservatory.
Mm,
And so, it's interesting for me because I always say everything that I learned in jazz, I learned it first in church. So even, testimony service, that's basically the jam session. The idea of somebody hops up and they start singing and you got to catch the key or the beat.
Yep.
I do that in jazz. So I think for me, the church I owe a great deal to, and I will always be indebted to not only my spirituality, but to the practicum and the environment of my spirituality. That is an incredible, as Fedara says, conservatory.
Okay, so you just literally just created a commercial for my entire platform. Thank you very much. I mean, without even asking, I did not set that up for you, ladies and gentlemen. That was not a setup. That was not a scripted question. Thank you, because you literally just laid out why God and Gigs really exist, to be straight up with you. Like that's really what it is. That everything, the education that you just mentioned, the education and the principles of working in a church and playing in a church. And it's not just the musicality, it's the ability to be malleable, teachable.
Right.
These are principles we learn. And I actually got this from another interview. I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it was one of my pastors, I think, who said it, referencing Oprah Winfrey, who was interviewing Whitney Houston and some of these other pop artists. And Oprah's mention was, y'all all started in church. What is it about these great entertainers?
Right.
And I think that's what it is. We get the best education, musical and otherwise, from our beginnings in the church. And as you said, it really is. I never thought of the conservatory. I love that phrase. And that, because now you do teach, now you are in conservatory places. I went to University of Miami for a school of music. And it was like, there was some things that I learned in school that I could only learn in the, that academic environment. And then there's certain things I'll never learn until I get on a stage or behind a pulpit. And so I love how you point that out, that's really what a connection is.
Well, and the other piece I want to mention to that, and not to belabor the point, but the other side, and this, having grown up in church, is when you talk about conservatory, as a person who went to a conservatory, one of the key ingredients that make it what it is and also allows you to produce a beautiful product is the toughness, right? And that's what church also provided, right? I mean, you also have, another side of that we won't even delve into, which is church hurt, right? Which you have a lot of emotional issues that come out of church because sometimes we just didn't know how to handle stuff, hurt people.
Yeah.
But the other side was this toughness of, if you could make the church get up and sing and catch the Holy Ghost, or you could inspire as a child, your church, you did something, you got up on Sunday and people start crying. That's a tough audience, because you're talking about blue collar workers. You're talking about people who, come from nothing, people who are coming to church to feel better. And if you have talent that can shift your church, chances are you can shift Carnegie Hall, So I think that's the other piece of it that does make it a very much conservatorial experience, is the toughness and the tough love and the push, of, okay, try it again. Sing it again, baby. Take your time. That energy is what I got at Juilliard. Oh, nope, Ulysses, one more time. Nope, again. You know what? Take 20 minutes and repeat it 30 times. Like, so it's the same sword, it's the same coin, just one is formal, one is informal.
I love that. And the key, like you just said, I feel like the two things that just popped in my head. One was taking that experience that you had, that tough love from the church, and then going into the academic environment where it's not the first time you've heard this. And then two, the discipline that already formed in you. So now I want to kind of take it to your individual development. You already mentioned growing up from church, then getting the jazz education from your family. So what was the point that it turned to professional? Like, when was the point? Was it college? What was the moment that you said, okay, now this is something I can do as a career?
So that started for me actually at about 16 years old. My family, I've always had a cousin, Wallace, who lived in New York City. And I remember we went and visited him around I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and we visited him. And I remember walking the streets of Harlem, going to Sylvia's. Sylvia's was actually still serving dinner then. And just seeing this energy of New York, but it didn't quite click like, this is where you're going to go. Mm-hmm. When I was 16, my mom said to me, because I was never big into college, I knew that I wanted to be professional. And I wanted to be a musician, but I didn't quite know like what that path would be. And she said, well, listen, we have no problem supporting that, but you're going to have to go to college. So you need to figure out like where you're going to go. And this is before Google. We had internet, but it was still, dial up. It wasn't,
AOL.
So you were right. So you were able to go on websites. And I remember going to Manhattan School of Music's website and seeing kind of the vibe. So my mom said, hey, me and your dad will pay for you to go to New York, spend some time with your cousin and see this school and go meet with the school, whatever. So I go there, meet with John Riley, Dick Lowenthal, who was the dean at the time. And John was like very encouraging. He said, man, you sound great. He said, but you don't sound like a jazz drummer. You sound like a gospel drummer. And if you want to go here, you got to learn jazz. So I said, well, where do I start? He said, well, pick up this Miles Davis record called Milestones, listen to Philly Joe Jones, and the rest is history. Simultaneously, I started playing gigs in Jacksonville. Jacksonville is a place that's very talented musicians because of the school University of North Florida, which had kind of been a place that Wynton Marsalis had spent a lot of time at. And this is the time when Wynton was hiring a lot of people in his band that were from the South. So he got Wyclef from up the street, Tallahassee from FAMU. He got Marcus Prennup from University of North Florida.
Really?
He got Vincent Gardner from University of North Florida. He got Marcus Roberts, who's from Jacksonville. So you've got this sort of Southern contingency that he's getting all these guys. So what that means is a lot of the players are playing their butt off because Wynton's coming to town all the time. The Jacksonville Jazz Festival is doing well. So I started getting serious about jazz during that time as well. And I started playing local gigs. By the time I was 17, I started running my own jam session. And I was playing probably 3-4 nights a week. So Thursday, Wednesday night, I had a jam session. Friday, Saturday, I was doing corporate gigs. Sundays, I was at church all day, and then I was in high school, all district, all city, all county, all state, all that. So I think the idea of a profession started when I was 16 because I was paying bills, paying my own bills and buying my clothes and stuff from gigging, because I'd already been working professionally as a drummer at church. They were paying me at church by the time I was 11 years old. So I've been professional and working most of my life, because of the music.
Wow. And that's what's so interesting that when you just mentioned about being paid even as a kid, and that's a whole nother, I don't want to get into that whole thing about being paid.
Listen,
that's a whole
thank God
situation.
for my dad.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, in terms of the professional education, so we said musical education, professional education of learning, like, okay, the do's and don'ts of the gig life, the do's and don'ts of if you want to get hired. And so I always go from like positive to negative and back to positive, right? So I kind of want to go to the negative a little bit because there's probably somebody listening saying, well, I wanted to do that. I wanted to get found. I wanted to be discovered. I didn't have these opportunities. So were there any lessons you learned that kind of helped you, avoid, or maybe you fell into some of the pitfalls, the professional things where you get hit by, I don't know, something about whether it's being on time, learning music, any of the things where like you learned lessons that you now can take and say to somebody else, here's how you avoid some of the pitfalls when you're trying to get into this professional world of playing?
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think for me, to be honest, my parents are amazing. My mother is very much the visionary, and she's the one, she's from that generation, baby boomer generation, pulled herself up by her bootstraps, worked as a secretary. And by the end of her corporate career, she was, executive or senior vice president at Merrill Lynch, so she was of that generation where you could work hard and learn how to manage and how to do all these things without a college degree. So I had a mother who understood or understands corporate mindset, understands strategic building and really entrepreneurship. My dad, military guy, very much about order. So I think having these two really amazing parents, that gave me a lot of great advice. I mean, I remember my mom was the first person that said to me, like, I had a gig with someone in town. I won't tell you who it was, but I had a gig with them and they didn't pay me, so I did the gig and I came home and I was like, Mom, I did the gig and they didn't pay me. And she said, well, why not? She said, did you ask them, what, like for the money? I was like, no, I thought they would have come to me and they would, I'd pack my drums up and whatever. And she said, well, that's your fault. She said, if you do a job, you need to learn how to be a man. She said, because me and your father aren't always going to be here for you. She said, so you need to learn how to be a man. And before your job is done, you go and you ask people or you say to them, hey, how are you going to pay me or whatever? And she said, and it's perfectly fine to do that. And as a result, the guy had my money, but he was older.
Yeah.
and he forgot to pay me. And so because I didn't ask him, you know, whatever, we settled up later. But those kind of little lessons are things that my parents taught me. And then I would say later on, I just started learning things by the school of hard knocks, just
Okay.
making mistakes, and also having great people. I've also had older people in my life a lot. Like you know, and I write about this in my book, The Musician's Career Guide. I talk about it a lot, that you need mentors. And so at each stage of my life, I've always kept older and more experienced people around me. So when I was 16, I was hanging around people in Jacksonville that were twice my age. I was at the college more than the college students. Then I had older musicians that were 60, 70 years old that took me in as like a grandson. Then same thing, I got to New York, and 3 weeks later, I met Mulgrew Miller, who adopted me, you know, musically. Then I met Eric Reed and met all these great musicians. And then same, when I got into business, I have several business mentors. One of my friends is the CEO of New Business Ventures for CAA agency in LA. And so he's been a business mentor and a friend to me for 10 years. I have another one of my friends. He's a major real estate developer and venture capitalist. He's been so I say all that to say, though I work my butt off, and I'm smart and I work hard at being smarter, I've always had people around me, and I will tell you, I ask questions. Like I asked, I'm talking about to this day. Like I was just in St. Louis the other day, and filming for Open Studio. I was filming a new course, and I'm rebuilding my studio so that I can have all the camera angles, all that stuff. And it's a new world, because now musicians, we got to go from playing to setting up all this stuff. And man, literally,
gotta be all that, your own studio, your own production company.
And literally, Peter Martin and the guys, they were laughing because literally they were like, Ulysses, we got to start your course, because I was asking questions for 30 minutes. I was like, okay, so about that, okay, well, what about that? And so I think for me, that has been the benefit of my life. To your point about how did I learn the business, was I asked questions, but then I also learned to watch, because there's some people who won't answer the question. So I'm like, oh, okay, you're not going to tell me the information. All right, now I'm going to study you like a hawk.
Wow.
And so that's why I wrote the book, because I felt like I always say I wrote the book that nobody gave me, right? And that book is all the things that nobody wants to talk about. And I figured out a way of studying people like a hawk and building a practicum and a curriculum that I could sort of serve it on a silver platter for people to say, hey, I don't know everything, but here's at least a starting point for you. And then we can kind of go from there.
That's exactly what happened to me. I'm just telling you right now, again, because it's over my shoulder. I'm not trying to promote, but it's true.
Like, book too. Oh, cool,
yeah,
man.
yes, sir. That's because I didn't want to go there. It's like, oh, I have one too. But that's the key, is that what you just said. That's why it rang true for me. It's like the book that I didn't have, and it's like when I was looking into my story, again, very quickly, it's not about me, but just me trying to break back into gigging after going to school and then full-time ministry and full-time teaching. And it's like, oh, wait, no one taught me that. What you just said, I wish I'd had your book, because nobody explained that. And coming out of school, academic, they didn't explain that either. They're just like, oh, learn all these chords, learn all these solos, and then you're on your own in terms of actually making a living doing this. So I wish I had that book. And then what I wrote was just basically how I made it as a church musician coming out of that world. So now you just put that out. The mentorship was huge. Asking questions was huge. So now I kind of want to go to the mountaintop side of, once you did apply those lessons, once you did kind of, hit the school of hard knocks, what was the payoff? Like, what was the moment that you either felt like you made it, or this is like a stage you'd never imagined coming because you applied the right principles? Like, where did that take you?
Well, I'll just say, for me, the idea of making it is, I've always been big on, because, as you know, as a musician and as a business owner, especially now in the age of post-pandemic, like, we've all had losses, right? So I can't say, oh man, if when I look at my bank account, that means I make it. No, for me, what I think is making it is I have my own autonomy, and I have my own agency. Nobody owns me. And I also can do what I want when I want. I decided, last year with my family, that my community wanted a jazz festival, and in 2 weeks we're having it, and I don't mean like in a rinky-dink way. I mean, not only is it a festival, it's a festival that now will probably rival, many other city jazz festivals. And so I think what my payoff for me making it is, I have the ability with excellence and with an incredible team and God's help and his favor to execute anything that I want and with excellence. So that to me is making it. And also whatever ideas that I have, when I pray and I commit them to meditation, God puts resources in my life and I'm able to bring them to fruition, versus I'm sure you and I both know so many people who've been writing a book for 20 years, been making an album for 20 years, been working on a school and a business plan for 20 years, been working on a daycare. Everything that I've ever wanted to do, not only have I done it, but it's still lasting. That's my success. And my organization, Don't Miss a Beat, it's been going for 13 years. My production company, UOJ Productions, 10 years old. My career as a drummer, over 20 years old. Now as an author, I have my, The Musician's Career Guide is my first large scale book, but then I also have a brush book with Hal Leonard, and I'm now working on, 3 other book projects. So I think for me, what making it means is whatever I desire to do with the right spirit, I'm able to do it, and it's able to get out there to the world. That's what making it is to me. And also, I talk a lot about this with Jameson Ross, who's an incredible artist and friend. He and I talk a lot. And one of the things I talk to him a lot about is the hamster wheel. And what I'm thankful about is that I'm not on the hamster wheel where I'm constantly, I'm active, I'm moving fast, I'm busy, I'm even tired, but I'm going in circles. And so what I'm thankful about is that I've gotten off the hamster wheel of being a drummer, waiting on somebody to call me, waiting on gigs, playing somebody else's music, waiting on somebody else to tell me when they can play music, wanting to start a business, but waiting on somebody to give me a check. Like, all that's hamster wheel, right? So what I'm glad about is I'm not on the hamster wheel anymore. And I have ownership in everything that I'm doing. I have an ownership stake in, and that is the direction that I want to continue to be in. And that for me is making it, because over time, the money will increase. And when it increases, I will have all ownership, because everything that I'm pushing forward are things that I own, versus I know friends of mine that are making, $1 million touring with this particular A-list artist. But when that artist is no longer on the charts, they're going to have to go somewhere else. So again, they got to get back on the hamster wheel. So that for me is what I think making it is.
Beautiful example and explanation of success, because I think success for many musicians who look at the big names that you just mentioned, they see someone playing with certain, there's another musician I just talked to, the exact same conversation. They said, look, I could be on tour for 6 months, 8 months with worldwide success, number one. And some people think that's making it because my name is mentioned with that other person.
Right.
But your name is not on the songwriting credits. Your name is not on the production credits. Your name is not on anything that brings you a check after that tour is done. And as you just mentioned, then you have to go back on the hamster wheel. So I appreciate you so much, once again, putting forward the idea that we have to have ownership, and the business side is not this. I want you to address this. I'm sure you address this in your book, and I want to kind of, turn people to that educational piece, because I think sometimes we just want it to come up through osmosis. Maybe other musicians, they're like, oh, if I just hang around people like this, but you really do have to study, and you really do have to pick up a book and read it. And so my question is, I'm not just kind of riffing, but the question in the middle of this is, what are those things that keep you from feeling like you have to divide between artist and business owner, artist and entrepreneur? Because I think some people, because you're an immensely gifted musician, and yet I don't see you saying, well, I can't be a great musician because I have to spend more time on the business side. I didn't hear anything of you saying that, but I'm sure there's some people that think you can't have both.
Well, here's the thing. I think, so there's 2 ways to answer that question. The first thing I will say is, today's music industry is not what it was even when I first started. And I think you and I are probably about the same age. So how old are you?
I'm trying to remember myself. That's how old I am that I don't remember. I'm 47.
Okay, well, so we're about 10 years apart. So even you more so than me, what you grew up in as the music industry is way different than even me, because if you're closer to 50, that means you grew up with way more venues. You grew up, where you had at least 20, 30 years of the idea of a musician making a living, being a musician. After the pandemic, I was literally just saying this to Alicia today. After the pandemic, the idea of being a musician solely and making a living solely is gone. You can make an income from being a musician, but now until the scene gets sort of regenerates, you're gonna have to do some other stuff.
Yeah.
Now, my goal is to make sure whatever that other stuff is, which is why I call myself a creative entrepreneur, I want it to be in the creative space. But you're gonna have to supplement that. So that's kind of the first point of making sure that you the world is different.
Yeah.
I want to go back. Can you just re-ask that again? Because there was another part of that question I wanted to.
Well,
make sure
there was a side. Yeah, I riffed too much.
No, it's all okay.
The key point that I was getting at was kind of like almost time management, right? Because you just said right? Because there's so many things that go into that, and I can see someone saying, "Well, you want me to be a great musician," and
so anyway, so I was saying all that to say that so today's musician, I do think, has to split their attention a little bit because there's not a world waiting for them. Now, for me, Alan, my focus and I can say this humbly, my focus from the time I was 2 years old, really until the time I was about 27, 28, 27, 28, maybe like 30. All I wanted to do was be a great drummer. That's all I moved to New York. First of all, in high school, I wanted to be in all the bands. Then I wanted to play, with a bunch of people. Then I moved to New York. I wanted to be the next Lewis Nash. He's an in-demand drummer. I wanted to be that in my own way. Then after I got to a point where everybody was calling me, then I was like, wow, okay, I think I want to start leading my own bands, and I want to start, maybe this production company thing. Like I want, but I had 25 years of at least 25 years, or at least 20 years, I would say, more, of just playing the drums and committing myself, which I talk a lot about this in the book, committing myself to mastery. Because here's the thing, mastery is the greatest entrepreneurial tool we will ever have. Like I can already tell what you're doing with interviews because you're asking really great questions versus you being like, okay, yeah, I'm going to build a podcast, but then I'm going to also go to this networking event. And then you get Bill Gates on the line and you don't even know how to ask him questions, right? So I think what we do have to make sure of is that we are committed to mastery, because mastery is the ultimate tool that will open up any door you want, which is why Steve Gadd is 70 and still working, or all these great musicians. Roy Haynes is in his 90s and still working, because mastery will always be the greatest marketing tool. Right. So I think the first thing I always tell musicians, and I have a couple different chapters on this in my book. Actually, the last chapter is called A Musician's Mastery, is the first thing we have to commit to is mastery. Because I always draw sort of the juxtaposition of talent versus mastery. Okay. And 90% of the world is talented. Less than 10% is masterful. Right?
You gotta hashtag that. That makes so much sense.
Think about it. You've got Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and thousands of other people that made computers. But there's something that was masterful about the way that Steve Jobs created the Apple computer and his innovative ability to be ahead of the curve. It's something about the way Bill Gates created his computer in the way that there's a PC every place in the world. Right. So that's mastery, right? And mastery never goes out of style, right? So I think the first thing I will say to answer your question finally is everybody needs to first commit to mastery. Whatever that, and mastery is not something, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Yeah. So if you look up and say, okay, I'm a drummer, become the best drummer, learn how to play whatever your style. If you're a gospel drummer, learn how to know the whole canon of gospel music and know the click tracks, the clap tracks, all of that. And then over time, people will want to work with you. Then once you've gotten to a certain level of mastery, then I think it's okay to say, wow, okay, I can play. I feel comfortable on my instrument. People love what I do. I have a little bit of an audience. Now, how do I become entrepreneurial and maximize that talent? Okay. And that mastery? But what you have now, and I'm seeing it all the time. I mean, even brands are doing this. They're finding these kids who are talented and they're pushing them in the limelight and they haven't achieved mastery. That's there's this girl, and I love her, but there's this really talented girl, Nandi Bushnell or something. She's really talented girl, plays the drums, cute girl, adorable, but she's like 12. And all of a sudden everybody's like throwing all this stuff, but she's not a master. She's 12 years old and she's hella talented. She's not a master. So what you're doing is you're giving her the appearance of mastery, and you're giving her all this stuff, when in 10 years, will she still be playing? Or if she's playing, will she still be able to, will she have a body of work? So the unfortunate thing, and I'll be quiet, is that we as a pop society, we have pushed the world towards talent.
Yeah.
We've pushed the world towards talent. And as a result of that, we don't even respect mastery anymore.
Ooh, okay.
So to your point, I think what I would say to that musician is be masterful,
okay,
commit to mastery. And when you get to a certain baseline, then you can start infusing some entrepreneurial elements. But don't think that you can be entrepreneurially successful and you can't even pick up the sticks.
Man, you said so much. The only reason is like you just like dropping so many things. Thank goodness it's a podcast and it's all recorded. They're like, wait, oh, that's right. We got this. We got this on tape. So here's where I want to jump into, because this is too meaty a subject to just jump away from. Sure. You just mentioned the fact that the people looking for talent versus looking for mastery. So now I'm going to turn it back on us as musicians to avoid that voice, right? Because so much is pulling us toward the social media. You just mentioned it. The TikTok generation, a minute at a time, a second at a time, our attention spans are being shrunk down. And so for us as musicians, we can think that all it takes is just that one moment of going viral. You just mentioned it in terms of like social media. So how do you get people, I don't know if it's whether it's through the reading, through books like yours, how do we get musicians to go back to, which you just said in my generation was playing that tape back, running that tape until it broke. But it's boring. Even as a teacher, and you as a teacher, I'm sure you have to deal with this too. How do you can't make it sexy. You can't make it enticing necessarily unless you tell people you can get where you are by following this process of going towards mastery. So is there any way to make it where it's more attractive to people?
One word, and it's the end of my book title. My book title is The Musician's Career Guide, right? Turning your talent into sustained success. So to me, what the sexy word and what I preach and what's going to be the determining factor or that sort of convincing thing is sustainability.
Okay.
Sustainability. So and that's why my career, even now, I have people who are like, man, I just wish more people knew about you. Why am I just finding out about you? And I'm like, hey, I'm not worried. You know what? Because I got a long life. And maybe my ship may come in 5 years. Maybe my ship may come in at 50, or maybe in 6 months, and the world may know who I am in a larger way. But either way, I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it so that I'm committed to mastery. And I know that when I sit down and play the drums, there's a level of mastery that I've been blessed to have because I've committed my life to it for over 30 years. And nobody can compete with that because that's my level of mastery. Just like I can't compete with Roy Haynes. So I think for me, why I don't rush or I'm not upset at people who seem to have like the short-term success is because it's going to be that short term. Yeah. And I don't want to get your podcast shut down, but I could give you a list of people that you'd be like, oh man, I remember. Oh wow, I remember when they came out. But you remember, but they're not current. Yeah. So to me, the enticing quality is sustainability. If you want to be sustainable, you look at a guy like Steve Gadd, who when Steve Gadd was 20, he was Steve Gadd playing with stuff, and then 30 playing with Chick Corea, and then 40 on every studio album, the Wiz soundtrack, and then now he's 70, still kicking butt. That's sustainability. Or Shaka Khan, who's had a 60-year career, Anita Baker, 40-year career, Jackson Family, Mary J. Blige, Puff Daddy, whatever sector you want to go to, when you start looking at people who have 30, 40-year careers, that's sustainability, and that's what I want to have. So to me, that's what I tell people, even parents who come to me and they're like, oh my God, my son's so talented. Look at a TikTok video. My thing is, will he or she still be playing or want to play in 5 years? Call me back in 5 years. Because I've been doing the same thing I've been doing since I was 2 years old, and I love it. And I've been committed to that path of mastery. So I think sustainability is what should be the drawing factor.
I love it. And it's so powerful that I think that's what we have to keep. I'm speaking for myself. I have to keep that in mind, because whether it's music or entrepreneurial, right? Both of those things, you just said it before, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's so hard to fight that pull to the instant success. But
Yeah.
I look back and I can see, even you mentioned your family a couple of times, and the family even that you have, the legacy and the thing you're trying to build in Jacksonville with this new, with your is it foundation? Is that the right way to put it? Your organization. That clearly goes right back to the core of who you are. It's not about short term. It's not about flash in the pan. You've gone out, you've done great things. You've traveled the world. You've been on stages, where people can know your name and see you, but then you brought it back home. Clearly you are about legacy and heritage. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like why that grounds you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, after being out in the world and continuing to go out into the world, I would be nothing without my family and without God and without, my mentors. I mean, if it was not for Mulgrew Miller and, Wynton Marsalis, even on a certain level, and Eric Reed, and the list goes on and on and on, I would not be who I am or who I am evolving into, because I'm a work in progress. So for me, coming back home was incredibly important, because I think one of the greatest things that we do not do as Black people, particularly, is most Black people want to make it out of the hood, right? Versus most people from Jewish communities, Asian American communities, even if they leave their origin country, they leave and they're constantly sending for people to come from that place and then take part of their success. Versus what I notice a lot with African Americans is that we become successful and we kind of leave people behind sometimes. And so for me, what I wanted to do was create a pipeline of success where, okay, I've been successful, not as successful as I'd like to be, but I'm planning on for more success. But even at the level of success that I've accomplished, I still have a lot I can give. And so my goal is to not wait till I become more successful. But even now, as a successful Black man, I haven't, thank God I haven't been arrested. I hadn't done anything crazy. I've, given back to my community. I can give a lot. So I think that is what is the crux of why our community still has not advanced in the ways that other communities have, because we don't pull each other up in the same way. And I have no problem being quoted about that. I think as a person who has Jewish friends and Asian friends and friends from the Middle East, and other cultures, and even certain African tribes, even Caribbean, Panamanian, Jamaican, Caribbean societies, one family will move the whole entire family in that house. Then that one person will go to college, and it's a system. African Americans, we at large don't do that. And so for me, Don't Miss a Beat was a way for me to create a combative tool against the cradle to prison pipeline.
Okay.
I'm creating the cradle to college pipeline. And so as I'm evolving, I want to also create that same thing. So for instance, I have 3 kids who have been with me for 7-8 years, and they just graduated high school, and all 3 of them are going to colleges and conservatories with pretty much close to full scholarships.
Beautiful.
So we have, and all of them are the first in their family to go to college.
Wow.
So that to me is bigger than me winning a Grammy. I just took 3 kids with my family's organization, and we changed the structure of our whole family. So now you've got 3 kids who are creating a new legacy of college education in their families. That is greater than a freaking #1 Billboard record. Now that's 3, because they say for every 1 child that goes to college, that's a whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
So now we've just impacted these 3 neighborhoods. So I think for me, I started Don't Miss a Beat because I wanted to create a solution, because I got tired of, to be honest, being at a version of the top and being alone. It's lonely, being up here, being one of the only African Americans in mostly white spaces, being in these Ivy League spaces, being in these, rooms that are incredibly profound, and, these film rooms, these studio rooms, and it's not many African Americans. And you can't just say, it's their fault. Well, now we've got all these new equity things that are happening, but a lot of it is those of us that get in the room are not saying, all right, cool, I'm in here. All right, Alan, come here. Hey, bro, now you come. A lot of times we getting in there, we're like, all right, mama, I made it. Let me buy the Benz in the house. And listen, I make enough money. I'm buying my mama a Benz too. But by the time I do that, I'm going to have probably 20 other people in that room with me that I've helped them as well. So I that is why Don't Miss a Beat exists, because I think, and I'll say this and be quiet, that the true evolution of the African American community, because I am an artist and a human being, but I'm a Black man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the evolution of our race is not going to evolve until we as a people come together and create new opportunities that shape that new society. We can't be waiting on the other person or the other culture to give us stuff. We still, even though they about to hand us some more opportunities, we still got to create our own ownership and help our people. And that's how we will see that society that we want over time. So that's why I started on Mr. Beat.
That's beautiful, man. I resonate with all that, and I haven't pulled my Northwest Florida card yet, but I'll pull it now because I'm I-10 too. I'm right over here in Pensacola growing up.
Oh, wow.
So as you talk about this, I'm thinking about my neighborhoods. I'm thinking about,
Right.
you know, I haven't been able to go back. Of course, I'm Florida, but you know, Miami and Northwest Florida are like two different states. You know
Absolutely.
this.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking about the people that I didn't, you know, don't say left. I don't want to say left behind, but that are still there, that don't have the opportunities because we're still, as you said, building. And as I was coming up in school, I thank God there were people, mentors, but as now you're building that pipeline, you're becoming that gateway, right? To where now somebody else 30, 40 years from now will fill your space. And I think that's a biblical thing too. We talked about, you started
Absolutely
about your faith. You know, we are supposed to be looking for our Moses and our Joshuas, right? So Moses doesn't have a Joshua to come back and take over and go into Jordan, and then Moses dies and everything just ends with him.
Well, and again, not to beat a dead horse, because you know I want to keep you on track in terms of I don't want to bear with, but I'll just say this: if we really want to talk about spirituality, and especially those of us growing up in Black church, we want to talk about all this Jesus this and God this, and he blesses you and right division, make it plain, and we have no succession plans, right? Like,
that's why I went there. That's why I opened that door. If you
look at particularly, and I'm very hard on the African American community because I do think that we obviously clearly were disenfranchised, and obviously we started with a 400-year back start, you know, but I still think that we could be doing other things. And one of the big issues I see, especially because I'm a strategy business guy, as I look at different communities and different races of people and how they run businesses and entrepreneurship, because particularly in the entrepreneurship space, it's not a lot of us. Succession planning is not something that we do. And, you know, talking about the Black church, I mean, most of the Black church has died. And instead of us acknowledging that, we keep hiding behind, oh, we're just going to change the slogan. We're going to get a new building. We're going to get a new, you know, whatever. We're going to still keep the old pastor there, but we're going to hire a new young youth minister. No, old granddad needs to sit down. He needs to sit down, have him maybe preach once every other month, but we need to let somebody 30, 40 years old come in and raise up a new generation. But a lot of our problem is we rule and we lead from fear, right? And so I think if we're going to ever evolve as a people, we've got to let go of fear and look at strategy. And strategy is not about fear. Strategy is about forward movement and growth. So, you know, even for me, at a certain point, I'm almost 40. In about, you know, 5 to 10 years. I mean, well, first of all, I already have somebody in mind as the new artistic director of Don't Miss a Beat.
And that's exactly,
you know,
I figured that.
I mean, I already have, like, I hire people, and I have a guy now that I'm training him to replace me potentially in another 5 to 10 years, because then I need to move on, particularly to executive leadership at Don't Miss a Beat, and then also he will be more connected to the youth than I am,
because he has time to build it. He has time to build
it. But not only that, it's relevant. At that time, he'll be my age now. He'll be like 30. Let's say he's 30, 35. I'll be closer to 50. The kids will see more in him than me. And listen, it doesn't mean that my influence leaves, but you have to also understand, to grow a business, you have to use different principles and different strategies. And part of it is you got to stay relevant. So, you know, again, the tangent that I went off on is, again, I think we as a people have to create things that live on beyond us. Yes. And then that's how you can, you know, look at like a company like Toyota that's lasted for so many years, or you look at a company like Ford that's lasted since the beginning of the century, because somewhere in there was somebody that was building a succession planning strategy that, you know, now, you know, your granddaddy drove Ford, you drove Ford, now I'm driving Ford, my kid's gonna drive Ford. Yeah. That's because somebody's passing that vision on. And so we've got to do that in the African American community with everything, not just with, you know, the top tier businesses.
That's so powerful. And again, I don't mind going there. That's why I didn't mind. You said, you know, there's not a rail, it's not a tangent. It's God and gigs for a reason. And gigs really involves everything in terms of what we own. And that's why I love to turn it back around to the creative side, because you're talking about legacy. I'm trying to build something that my children can have
Right.
something, a stake in after I'm
Right.
gone. You're building something that your children and your the legacy in your area, you
Yeah.
know, in Jacksonville can have after you're gone or after you've moved on. So let me ask you this
Absolutely.
one other question. What is next for you? What is your next? Is it music? Is it albums? Is it more I mean, obviously it could be all kinds of things because you
Right.
clearly
Right.
got this great strategic plan, but let's just talk
Right.
about your, you know, the next, I guess, couple of years. Like what's next coming up for you?
Well, I would just say, I've spent the last few years um, doing a lot of different things. Obviously, I've always been a drummer. I've always been an educator. Now I'm an author. An entrepreneur, which has a bunch of things. But I think what I want to see now is the things that I've done and begun to really grow exponentially.
Okay.
Because I think I spent, my 20s just working on drumming. I spent my 30s kind of trying to find my way. And I think now I've really found it. I'm an educator, drummer, creative entrepreneur, author. So I would love for those sort of titles to just grow, and so now it's no longer, don't miss a beat, operating at, where we are now, threshold of touching, a couple hundred kids. Now we're touching, or we're helping, I should say, 1,000 kids, a year. Instead of my book being, with maybe a smaller publisher, is now with Penguin Random House, and now I'm speaking at 200 to 300 conferences a year, and I'm able to reach 1 million people in a year, and not so much for my own gain, but to get that information out there. Same thing with my career as a drummer. Hopefully being able to advance as a band leader. I still play gigs as a sideman, but my real love and dream would be to tour 6 to 10 months out of the year, like broken up in dates,
Okay.
but as a band leader. So I would say just my goal now is I don't want to necessarily start anything new. I feel like I've done that a lot. I've had a couple failed businesses, but I feel like I now have good business ideas that just need time to grow, but exponentially, in a way that it shifts my life and allows me then to build wealth for my family. Because I feel like I have a wealth of ideas, but I'm now ready to build a sustained sort of tangible wealth for my kids and their children. So I want growth. That is what I want, and growth in the direction of the things that I have planned. And then, maybe as I get older, 15, 20 years from now, then I could say, okay, maybe I may delve into some consulting or some other things, but I want true growth. I'm ready for the things to kind of pop off and really expand. That's what I'm hoping for the next
That's
couple of years.
I hear I already heard it. Even as I asked the question, I was waiting for
Okay.
this amazing because uh I get so caught up in it's my ADD talking, as you can see. I get
That's okay.
the
Hey,
words go
another
fast.
fellow ADD guy.
Yeah, exactly. The music, it works in music, it doesn't work so much in
Right, right.
podcasting. But what I was going to say was what I hear is the idea that you've already dug these roots and now you're watering, right? You've already done all the digging, you did all this, the school of hard knocks, and
Mhm,
now you've got roots, you've got mastery. That was a key point that you talked about. I'm so
mhm.
glad. You guys need to rewind that and make sure you say that section about mastery being the main marketing tool. That was gold right there. But now you're talking about right back to what your book says, sustainability. So these
Right.
things grow because they're sustained, because they have a root system deep enough in terms of your
Mhm.
music and your entrepreneurial life, that, and your spiritual life, by the way. I want to go back to that because this is God and Gigs, that clearly you dug some roots where there's something that the foundation will stay firm as you build up,
Right.
versus the other side we talked about, which is the, fly by night talent, flash
Right.
in the pan. So you clearly built so much of a career and that we can follow and be an example. So I appreciate you so much. I want to make sure
Thank
before
you.
we end this that you tell people how to follow you, how to find your book, how to
Sure.
find your music.
Sure.
This is, not the last time they're going to want to interact with you. So let them know how to find
Great.
you.
So I'll just say everything, home base for me is UlyssesOwensJr.com. That is where everything, is kind of the hub. So you can find a lot of stuff there. Don't, for those that are interested in the organization, don'tmissabeat.org. For the book, all my books, my brush book and this recent one is on Amazon. So you type in my name, that's there. My album, Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, all the major streaming outlets. And then, yeah, anything, that I'm doing, I would say is on social media. I'm on Facebook via fan page and Twitter, but my thing that I love is Instagram. I
Okay.
love it. So I spend a lot of time on Instagram because it's a great way to interact with my audience. And that's simply Ulysses Owens Jr. _ And I'm verified, so you'll know it's me. But that's the place I love, you know, because you can interact, and I just like the interface and how it it's very user friendly, and so that I update. I'm always, you know, putting up motivational stuff. Like
I was gonna say, I've been digging your writing probably more than you dropped some nuggets on those Instagram quotes as well, sir.
Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, I mean, you know, and it's funny, man, because I've had people say that to me. They're like, man, where are you getting these? But a lot of it's how I keep myself motivated, you know. So I'm just basically like, I'm like, ooh, man, that helped me today. Let me just put it out there. So a lot of times that's why I do it. But also I'm very positive and I need positive reinforcement. So those really positive memes are just kind of like reminders. And I feel like it's God's way of speaking to me and sending me different things that be like, all right, dude, just keep going. And as you go, keep motivating other people because, you know, as the Bible says, iron sharpens iron, right? Yep. And so I think as you and I sharpen each other, then you sharpen somebody else and then they sharpen someone else. So as we continue to share that positivity, that becomes infectious and then that creates manifestation. So yeah, man, that's yeah. So I say all that to say I love Instagram so people can keep in touch with me via that. And you know, I always say ain't too many Ulysses Owens Juniors out there. There's definitely Ulysses Owens, but he's my dad and he ain't no drummer. So
so you're not gonna get that mixed up though. And he's not on Instagram like you are, like doing like
he's on Facebook though, but he's not on Instagram.
So. This has been an incredible talk. Again, I'm going to go rewind this myself just to hear everything and break it down. But we're going to make sure this goes out to everybody we can. Ulysses, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we're definitely going to hopefully do this again sometime. But until then, God bless you and thank you so much for sharing your time.
God bless you, Alan. You take care, brother.